In the weeks leading up to the still undefined D-Day, commanders argued about every detail of Operation Overlord. Sometimes the arguments grew contentious. In one just a few weeks before the invasion was launched, British Air Chief Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory, under whose aegis the airborne forces would operate, got cold feet and told Lieutenant General Omar Bradley that he feared casualties among the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions would be catastrophic. He urged the commander of Overlord Ground Forces, General Sir Bernard Montgomery, to cancel the operation. Furious, Bradley replied that if the airborne and the glider landings were eliminated, then he would insist that the whole Utah Beach plan be scrapped. Ultimately, Montgomery had to step in and settle the heated disagreement, ruling that the airborne and glider portion of the invasion would proceed as planned. Leigh-Mallory's pessimism and predictions of doom were one more burden for General Eisenhower to carry. In his book Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower notes, if Leigh-Mallory was right, it appeared that the attack on Utah Beach was probably hopeless, and this meant that the whole operation suddenly acquired a degree of risk, even foolhardiness, that presaged a gigantic failure, possibly Allied defeat in Europe. The airborne and seaborne landings at Utah Beach had been deemed vital, because in addition to being a blocking force that could prevent a counterattack against the western end of the invasion area, the troops that landed at Utah would be in good position to head north and capture the deepwater port at Cherbourg. Nobody liked the look of Utah Beach. Eisenhower himself described it as miserable, even though he didn't want to cancel the assault. On the landward side was a shallow, wide lagoon, crossed by narrow causeways, on which the Germans would certainly direct their artillery. If the Germans could hold on to the exits from these causeways, the troops would be trapped on the beach. The planners of Operation Overlord were worried that 2 of the 3 American infantry divisions selected to land on D-Day had not seen combat before, but it could not be helped. The only other experienced combat divisions on that side of the world were tied down in Italy. Selected to lead the charge at Utah Beach, therefore, was the 4th Infantry Division. It had been decided that the units going into Normandy on D-Day needed to rehearse their actions in places in Britain that most resembled the actual landing places in France. For that reason, the beach at Slapton Sands in Lime Bay on the Devon coast was found to be an almost identical twin to the place where the troops destined for Utah Beach were scheduled to land. On April 27, 1944, it was decided to use live ammunition during a rehearsal known as Exercise Tiger. That morning, the landing ships were delayed, and the officer in charge, Admiral Don Moon, decided to delay the landing for 60 minutes. Some of the landing craft didn't receive word of the change and disembarked their men according to the original timetable, just as the now rescheduled naval bombardment began raining shells down on the beach. The men of the 4th Division had never really expected to be placed in harm's way in what was supposed to be a simulation, but suddenly found themselves in danger of being blasted into pieces. In the ensuing chaos, scores of soldiers crossed the white demarcation line as they were attacking their imaginary enemy that ended up directly in the kill zone. Rumors circulated along the fleet that as many as 450 men were killed. As if that weren't bad enough, soldiers participating in an exercise after midnight encountered an even greater tragedy. A squadron of German torpedo boats appeared out of nowhere and began attacking the unsuspecting flotilla. In that one terrible night, more than 800 U.S. servicemen died. It would be a toll far greater than what the division would suffer on D-Day. The casualty lists were kept top secret. Families were only notified that their loved ones had died due to a training accident. Despite the tragedy, Operation Overlord would go on as scheduled. After being delayed for 24 hours because of a strong storm sweeping through the English Channel, the great day arrived, and with it, a great armada that had been assembled for Operation Neptune, the assault phase of Overlord. The 4th Infantry Division had been designated Force U. Troops destined for Omaha Beach were Force O. Once the beachhead had been secured, follow-on forces would arrive on Utah later in the day. These included the 90th Infantry Division and the 4th Cavalry Regiment. To soften up German defensive positions, 18 ships from the U.S. Navy and Royal Navy pummeled miles of shoreline with thousands of high-caliber shells. 20 minutes before the scheduled seaborne landings, 300 B-26 came in low over the beachhead and bombed the German positions. This was in stark contrast to what happened at Omaha Beach, where the Navy overshot its targets and the Air Force bombed too far inland. At 0630 hours, 300 men of the 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry Regiment, became the first seaborne unit to hit the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. The men threw themselves on the golden sand, waiting for enemy machine guns to open up on them. Surprisingly, the only battle sound to greet them was the crump of random artillery shells and the ripping sound of shells still flying overhead from Allied ships offshore. Utah Beach was divided into 3 sectors: Tear Green, Uncle Red, and Victor. The men of the first wave quickly realized that they had landed on the wrong sector. The strong current had pulled them too far to the southeast, and 3 of the 4 designated control craft that were supposed to have guided the Higgins boats in had been lost to mines. 5 minutes after the first wave hit the sands, the second wave, Companies A and D of the 1st Battalion and Companies G and H of the 3rd Battalion, began arriving at Tear Green. Next came the amphibious tanks. A group of 32 duplex-drive Sherman tanks was supposed to have arrived 10 minutes before the infantry, but rough sea conditions caused them to be 20 minutes late. 4 of them never made it at all because their ship struck a mine and sank. The remaining 28 tanks made it safely to the beach. The 4th Division had planned to have artillery support on D-Day, but a large landing craft carrying 60 men of the 29th Field Artillery Battalion struck a mine, and all 60 were killed. At about 10 a.m., elements of the 22nd Regiment arrived and began eliminating enemy strongpoints along the shoreline. In some cases, naval gunfire had to be called in to finish the job. Meanwhile, the 8th Regiment was pushing farther inland. Companies B and C advanced upon strongpoints WN7 and WN5. Companies E and F advanced to WN4, where they met little resistance. As this action was taking place, Companies G and H moved southward and came under machine gun fire from strongpoint WN3, but soon captured the position. For soldiers who had never before seen combat, the men of the 4th Infantry Division were doing a remarkable job. Soon, the 2nd Battalion began pushing along Causeway 1 to exit the beach. As more men and vehicles piled into the sand, Causeway 2 became the main exit off the beach. The casualties of the 2 American airborne divisions were heavy, as Lee Mallory had feared, but they managed to sow confusion among the enemy, stop reinforcements from reaching the beachhead, and captured important towns and road junctions. Thanks to the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne who knocked out the batteries at Brecourt Manor and Holdy, and then captured Sainte Marie du Mont, the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Regiment advanced along Causeway 2 practically unopposed. By mid-afternoon, the 3rd Battalion linked up with elements of the 82nd Airborne south of St. Mary-Glise, and then encircled a group of Georgians belonging to an Ost Battalion. The Americans needed to neutralize this position that threatened the later arrival of glider reinforcements. The Georgians stubbornly held out until the next day, when a coordinated attack from the 4th Division and the 82nd Airborne forced them to abandon the area. As June 7 wore on, the skies were filled with combat gliders swooping in with additional troops, equipment, and supplies. Although many gliders crashed upon landing, those that made it were contributing to the overwhelming success of the landings on the Utah Beachhead. The total casualties of the division on the first day were 197. Once Operation Overlord had succeeded, Eisenhower wrote, "Our good luck was largely represented in the degree of surprise that was achieved by landing on Utah Beach, which the Germans considered unsuited to major amphibious operations." Eisenhower's words were a fitting tribute to the men of the 4th Infantry Division.